Almost immediately after MCR's mainstream breakthrough, record labels began scouring the country for bands that could replicate that magic formula. Now, this first wave of imitators emerged between 2005 and 2007, and what distinguished them from later generations was their direct proximity to the original. These weren't bands copying copies, they were studying MyChem's blueprint in real time and attempting to reverse engineer their success. So let's examine three bands that perfectly encapsulate this first generation, each representing a different approach to the MCR template. Aiden emerged from Seattle in 2003, originally formed as a more straightforward post hardcore band. When MCR's success proved there was a massive audience hungry for theatrical darkness, Will Francis and company pivoted hard into Gothic territory. They took the most literal interpretation of My Chemical Romance's visual brand, where Gerard Way's theatrical makeup felt like an artistic statement rooted in his love of comic books and horror films. Aiden's presentation looked more like they raided a spirit Halloween store. Their 2005 album, Nightmare Anatomy, arrived at the perfect moment to capitalize on MCR's breakthrough. Musically, they grasped the quiet to explosive dynamic that made songs like Helena so effective, but they stripped away all the progressive complexity that gave MCR's arrangements their depth. Aiden's songs like Knife Blood Nightmare and Die Die My Darling showed that they could write hooks, but their approach to death imagery felt more slasher film than gothic novel. Their attempts at concept albums throughout 2005 and 2006 showed genuine ambition, but lacked the narrative coherence that would later make the Black Parade so compelling. Most tellingly, they only captured MCR's aggression while completely missing the vulnerability that made Gerard Way's vocals so powerful. What's fascinating about Aiden is that their frontman, Will Francis, was actually older than most of his scene peers and had a genuinely rough upbringing that informed the band's darker ethos. The music might not have hit the same heights, but Will himself was relatively beloved in the industry. In the alternative press offices, for example, we had a term for bands like Aiden. We called them GGBB. Good guys, bad band. Will knew how to work the room. He was shaking hands with editors. He knew how to charm headlining bands. He was doing all the political maneuvering necessary to get coverage. Aiden rode that wave hard from 2005 to 2007, landing major tours and significant radio play. But when My Chemical Romance evolved from Three Cheers into the stadium ready spectacle of the Black Parade, Aiden couldn't make that same leap. Their 2007 album Conviction felt like more of the same at a time when the scene was demanding evolution. And by 2008, as the musical landscape shifted towards more of a polished production and broader appeal, Aiden found themselves increasingly irrelevant. The band essentially dissolved by 2012, with Will eventually reinventing himself as William Control, diving deeper into industrial and electronic elements, perhaps realizing that staying in My Chemical Romance's shadow was a dead end. It would be impossible to talk about Aiden without saying that years later, in 2018, Francis would face serious allegations about running a sex cult, a scandal that seemed almost too fitting given his adopted moniker of Control. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a moment and discuss 30 Seconds to Mars, the celebrity shortcut. Before Jared Leto tried to become the face of alt-rock's theatrical revival, 30 Seconds to Mars started as his attempt to prove that he was more than just a pretty face from shows like My So-Called Life and movies like Requiem for a Dream. Formed in 1998 with his brother Shannon, the band initially explored a more experimental ambient sound that had little in common with what would make them famous. Everything changed when they witnessed MCR's ascension. Their 2002 self titled debut had barely registered, but their 2005 follow up, A Beautiful Lie, showed that they'd been studying MCR's homework very closely. They took the progressive rock arrangements and dramatic builds, but filtered them through a space and sci-fi theme instead of death imagery. Songs like Attack and, of course, The Kill captured some of that grandiose vulnerability that made MCR so compelling, but 30 Seconds to Mars made it more ethereal than visceral. Their visual presentation looked a lot like MCR's theatrical elements. And if you're watching the video for The Kill, it's hard to ignore Jared Leto's gorgeous MAC cranberry eyeshadow, which almost everybody knows was an essential in the makeup bag of any member of the MC army. But what's crucial to understand is how desperate 30 Seconds to Mars seemed to want to be part of the My Chemical Romance ecosystem. It appeared that they did everything possible to land opening slots on My Chem tours. And, the closest they got was playing Taste of Chaos, which was essentially the louder, harder version of Warped Tour. I personally remember meeting Jared Leto after the band played the Agora Ballroom in Cleveland, Ohio. I think they were opening for Puddle of Mud. And I was standing before him, looking at his eyes. He was shaking my hand. And I've got to tell you that I would have followed this guy into a cult. He was that magnetic. And I wonder if that's not the effect he has on almost every audience he plays in front of. I mean, he could be playing bluegrass covers of James Blunt songs and people would love it. So, can we deny that the celebrity factor is the band's secret weapon? While bands like Aiden had to fight for every magazine cover and radio spin, 30 Seconds to Mars got a lot of attention simply because Jared Leto was already famous. And this air quote vanity project moved to the head of the class much faster than some hardcore bands with an anonymous frontman ever could. And I'm sure the band would say that the celebrity status was more of a curse than a blessing because they had to overcome the dog star expectation for the band. If you're too young to understand that reference, I will give you a moment to go on Wikipedia. Needless to say, they rode MCR's wave from 2005 through 2009, growing increasingly ambitious with each release. And what's remarkable is that they were smart enough to evolve beyond their influences. So when MCR started fragmenting after the Black Parade, 30 Seconds to Mars doubled down on that theatrical spectacle, eventually becoming the arena rock act that maybe MCR might have become if they hadn't imploded. By 2013's Love, Lust, Faith, and Dreams, 30 Seconds to Mars completely shed their MCR influences, demonstrating that sometimes the best way to honor your inspiration is to eventually transcend them entirely. And unlike many of their peers, they successfully graduated from tribute act to legitimate headliners, still touring around the world today. Okay, last band in Generation 1, the direct copies, is From First to Last, The Confessional Misstep. From First to Last emerged from Los Angeles in 2003 as part of the same post-hardcore scene that produced bands like The Bled and Bleeding Through. Initially, they were just another screamo band with decent hooks and tight musicianship, but when a young Sonny Moore joined as the frontman in 2004, everything changed. Moore brought an androgynous energy and emotional vulnerability that perfectly captured the zeitgeist MCR had tapped into. His youth was crucial. At just 16, when he joined the band, he offered their young audience an accessible gateway into the group because it felt like a peer to peer connection rather than adults trying to relate to teenagers. Their 2004 debut, Dear Diary, My Teen Angst Has a Body Count, arrived just as the scene was exploding, and songs like Note to Self and Emily showed that they could balance aggression with genuine melodic sensibility. Side note, I remember being on Warped Tour probably around this 2004 date, and a bag of medication was accidentally delivered to the alternative press tent. It was Accutane, and it was for Sunny. Luckily, I was able to give the medication to someone in Motion City to pass it along because I felt way too awkward doing it myself, but that's how young Sonny Moore was. Sunny, cutie little pimple boy. Back to what we were talking about. Where from first to last fundamentally misunderstood, MCR's approach was in their lyrical strategy. They went for confessional over storytelling, missing the narrative distance that made Gerard Way's personal revelations feel universal rather than narcissistic. Sonny's lyrics were often painfully direct, lacking the literary flourishes that elevated MCR's similar themes. From first to last, rode the wave hard from 2004 to 2006, becoming staples on Warped Tour and landing major label support. Their visual presentation adopted the eyeliner and emotional intensity, but only at surface level. They had the look down, but their interpretation of the MyChem formula always felt more obvious, more transparent. Then came the seismic shift. In 2007, Sonny Moore left the band entirely. He didn't just leave from first to last, he left the entire genre behind. He carved out an entirely new corner of music for himself as Skrillex, showing that sometimes the most successful escape from being a copy is to completely reinvent the game you're playing. But what happens next shows how crucial Moore had been to the identity of From First to Last. With Matt Good taking over vocal duties, From First to Last released Thrown to the Wolves in 2010, but a lot of the magic was gone. The songs felt like pale imitations of their earlier work, and without Sonny's charismatic presence, they couldn't maintain their audience's attention. The band tried to soldier on, but they'd essentially become a tribute act to their former selves. Okay, so how does this all wrap up into Generation One's legacy? What united all three of these bands was their genuine belief in what My Chemical Romance was doing. They weren't cynical cash grabs, they were true believers who happened to arrive at similar creative destinations around the same time. The problem was that they were working from the outside in, copying the aesthetics and arrangements without fully grasping the personal experiences that gave those elements their power. Gerard Way's struggles with addiction, his experience witnessing 9/11, his battles with depression, these were not just biographical details. These were the foundation that made every artistic choice feel necessary rather than calculated. The first generation bands could replicate the formula, sure, but they could not manufacture that level of authentic experience. Still, they served an important function. They demonstrated that there was a hungry audience for this type of music, paving the way for the wave of bands that would follow. Yet this also established the template that would eventually be copied and recopied until the original vision became almost unrecognizable. The success of these first generation bands opened the floodgates for something more problematic. The second wave of imitators who would be copying their interpretation of MCR rather than studying the original directly.